So I wanted to get into one of the lesser known conversations about Stay Night, and that is the situation where Kirei was able to steal Chulainn from his original master. And this is how Kirei ended up having two servants during the story. Who was his original master and how did he manage to pull this off? So going back into the Fate route, we have a scene in particular where they address this firsthand. Rin tells Shiro that beyond what they thought, Ku isn't Kirei's original servant, and she actually found the base of his original master. Now she's always had a strange feeling about the situation, but it wasn't until she did some digging that she was able to confirm it. She gets to the base, and this is an old Edelfelt mansion that's on the outskirts of the city, something that later gets addressed in the sequel. She goes inside, and what she finds is the left arm of the master, and notice that the command spells have been stripped off of it, further elaborating on what Kirei had done, saying that she believes that his original master is no longer alive. Not only had Kirei incapacitated her, but he had also cut off her entire arm in the process just to take Ku. And considering that he's an overseer in the church, he is allowed to do this. He can hold several command spells at once in his reserves, as we've seen before with his father, and as we've seen before with him, they can have an entire sleeve's worth. We also know that masters can form multiple contracts at once, and this is what allowed him to form the new contract with Ku. Now, getting into Ku's original master, this was Bazett Fraga. Again, she is someone who has appeared in multiple works. She's in fact one of the older characters. She's in Ataraxia, she's in Prisma Ilia, she's been in FGO as a pseudo servant. And this exact situation would be the reason that she would go on to be one of the lead characters in the sequel Hollow Ataraxia, where we follow the storyline from her perspective after these events. Ataraxia taking place 6 months after the Grail War was finished. And most importantly, she's an enforcer for the Mages Association. We've covered that before. An enforcer is someone who is literally contracted by the association to hunt down mages that they deem should be wiped off the map or brought back to them entirely. In fact, it was the enforcers that were hunting down Kiritsugu's father. She's one of them. She's a very skilled and powerful individual. Smart, she knows martial arts, and if you've seen my video on her Don't Sleep on Bazett, you would wonder how Kirei was even capable of getting the upper hand on her, that she would be way too strong for something like this to happen. And that's the part that we're going to address. So going back into the backstory of Kirei, which was partly revealed in Ataraxia, they also went into the fact that the enforcers, the group where she comes from, and the executors would often do joint missions together, and they'd end up working alongside one another. They continued to go on these missions together, and they ended up becoming closer acquaintances to each other than everybody else. As a matter of fact, if you go into the side material, it goes as far to say that they were old friends. Eventually they were together at a point, and the mission was to take down a mage that had a ceiling designation, the same thing I mentioned before that Kiritsugu's father had. So Kirei was the one that ended up taking this unnamed mage's life as a member of the church to claim his soul, and then Bazett will be the one that disposed of the body for the association. They continued to work together in secret. They were around a campfire after one of these missions, and Kirei decides to open up to Bazett. Now at the time, he didn't really have any ulterior motives of him opening up. It's just that him being the type of person that he is, transparency really isn't an issue for him, especially after the events of Fate Zero, with him coming to terms with himself. It'd be no different from him telling you the meals that he ate for that day. On the other hand, Bazett looked at this vulnerability as Kirei putting himself on the table and him revealing things to her that he normally wouldn't. And for that, she gained a lot of respect for him way faster. You know, people love honesty. She admits to the fact she doesn't know how she got charmed by somebody so dangerous, but if she could win Kirei over, a person that clearly doesn't need anybody, it would bring her a feeling greater than anything in the physical. And this is the reason why he was able to fool her so easily. Again, Again, while Bazett was a strong, intelligent, and skilled individual, just like many others, she's always had her own doubts and insecurities. So for somebody as strong as Kirei to open up to her in this way, them being in the same field together, them working alongside one another, she couldn't help but start to fall for him. And that was her mistake, because in doing so, she let her guard down. And that's how the scenario came to be. When she first met Kirei, she told him out her own mouth, "We work together and that's it. You're not somebody I can trust my back to." And you can see those feelings slowly started to change. There's a lot of people that believe the situation of Kirei taking Cuchulainn from Bazett was some type of fight. No, there was no fight. She let her guard down, she exposed herself, and he took advantage of it. It's the same situation with Tokiomi. Tokiomi believed in Kirei, he let his guard down, and then he was a deceased man. Same situation with Rasputin and Da Vinci back in FGO. Now that I think about it, this man Kirei is the black forces of backstabbery. He gotta be. And a part of him opening up was him outright telling her that he's evil. Word for word, he told her, "I'm incapable of loving anything," that he has no morals. And though he did give her some guidance to not beat herself up by imparting her with wisdom from his life and things that he learned, the answer was still right there in front of her face. But she decided to take her chances anyway. So prior to the events of the Fifth Grail War, Kirei decides to invite Bazett to participate in the war. He told her, "Let's meet up." He goes to the Edelfelt mansion, and Bazett is just super excited because in her mind it's more like, he picked me. Out of everybody he could have called, he chose me. They have their normal discussion about the Grail War because she was familiar with what was going on, and in between them doing so, Kirei pulled the rug on her, and that's when he sliced off her entire arm and took her command spells. In fact, by the side materials, it outright tells us that she didn't even have time to call out to Ku, and her arm had already been stolen from her. And then it further goes into the commands that he gives in the story. One of the command spells he used to force Cuchulainn to accept him as his master. The second command spell, and one that I bring up often, is the one where he told Cuchulainn to go around and gain intelligence on other masters and servants in the war, but don't exactly take them out. And then it tells us the final command spell was something that was covered in the story itself. And of course, we know that was the command spell that he would later use to make Cuchulainn take his own life. So he forms his own contract, and then he continues on in the war in her place. And he takes Ku in every route. Remember, Kirei stealing Ku as a servant is prior to the Grail War even starting. That always happens. And for a lot of people, this situation may stir up some confusion time-wise, because in the sequel that follows her, Ataraxia, when we're introduced to her, her arm was fine. It was still attached to her body. If we're going by the events of Stay Night, if she lost an arm, naturally, wouldn't she just bleed out? On one hand, you can look at this as Fate Stay Night telling you how things would have ended without an outside intervention. And then on the other hand, you can just look at it as a temporary inverse lie. Because what we later come to find out is that Kirei's daughter came to heal her. Angra suspended her conscience in a dream sequence, and through this she was able to survive. And getting more into Angra's position, this was a different interpretation of Angra from the beast that we know in Fate background. It all goes back to the conversation of the idea of how Kirei wanted the real Angra to be born, and he'd often ask Shiro those philosophical questions. How can something that hasn't been born be evil if you don't even know what it is? Because as it turns out, Angra, the Angra we know, he's not the actual premature Angra that we saw in Heaven's Field. He's a boy that had all of the village's curses pushed upon him, and he took up the mantle of being Angra in the story, later using Shiro's body as a vehicle. So that version of Angra actually isn't even evil, he just plays the role. Come to think of it, he's almost an opposite to Kirei, because Kirei was that person who was evil deep down inside, but he played the role of being good. But the irony here, and the reason that I bring all all of that up is because the guy that's supposed to be evil is the one that ended up saving Bazett. And it also acts as an answer to Kirei's question. And to bring everything back around without getting too deep into Ataraxia, the placeholder Angra ends up becoming Bazett's servant in Ataraxia, and she kind of gets her own second go around at the 5th Grail War, but in a completely different manner, because the timeline of Ataraxia is screwed. It's all over the place, and you'll later come to find that's what the story is.